But, you know, just to do some housekeeping first, for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Lisa. I work at Fighting Chance headquarters in Frenchs Forest in Sydney. I've been with Fighting Chance for almost 6 years, but have been in the sector for 16. As of this month, there you go. It's my anniversary. And so I'd love to acknowledge the Darug people on the land of which I'm speaking to you tonight. I'm surrounded by beautiful Australian bush and feel very grateful to be on this beautiful country. And I want to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging from where I am and also from where you are tonight. So thank you for being here. My colleague Ali is here too. So Alessandra's got her video on. So I just wanted to thank Ali as well, and Susanna, who's also here from Fighting Chance, as we've all been working together to try and put together a series for you all about community education, because the changes that are happening within the NDIS at the moment are frequent and quite intense. So we want to make sure that we understand it so that we can then translate it for you guys, because I'm finding that when people are not given the opportunity to be informed about NDIS changes, you don't actually have the opportunity to get the most out of the NDIS. So tonight I want to try and update you all on changes that have happened to the NDIS legislation. So this all came into play on the 1st of July. So since it's the NDIS that we're dealing with, there's a good chance that things are going to keep evolving and keep changing. So I'm sure that we've not seen everything tidy and neat. I'm sure there's going to be new things that happen, but this is what, oh, hello, Andrew. I didn't recognize Andrew's face. So let's just start with what we know. But because it's the NDIS, we know that there's going to be more changes and there'll be different forms, and you know how it is, but let's just catch up with where things are at now. So where are we at? So you are going to get these slides sent to you, and the slides have links in them. And so you'll be able to go look at some further details yourself. But I'm also going to stop sharing the slides every now and then and share some of the links that I'm talking about, so I can go through some of the changes and show you some live links. Now I'm just going to find who that is. So whoever's not on mute, I need you on mute, because otherwise we can't chat. There we go. I think I've got you all on mute now. Okay, so the NDIS Act of 2013 is still called the NDIS Act of 2013, but there were lots of amendments that came in on the 1st of July this year. There were actually some amendments that came in April as well. So I'll show you one of those in a second as well. That's quite significant for, I think, for your planning reassessments of yourself or your person who's a participant. So of course, when it comes to the NDIS, there's new language. So already we know that the NDIS is its own language. And now as of 1st of July, there's new language to add to that NDIS language. There's new forms. So I'm going to show you the forms, but also when you get the slides sent to you with the email that you registered for tonight, you'll also get those forms sent in as attachments to you as well. So when there's new forms, there's new processes and there's new options. So fun and games, nothing stays the same with the NDIS. So let's see the first bit of info. So when the NDIS did its media release around the new legislation changes, they introduced us to 2 key new terms. So I'm just going to read through part of that media release from the 30th of June this year. So they said, from the 1st of July, when participants and their authorised representatives ask for a change to their NDIS plan, the agency will be able to do this in some circumstances without having to replace the current plan with a new one. This will now be called a plan variation. This is actually very significant because it also means that if there's just one part of your plan that you think needs to be edited, you can now request just that one part to be looked at. So in the past, before all of this, if you had an NDIS plan that had an amazing capacity building budget and you were really happy with your capital budget and your assistive technology, but it was your core support budget that was a problem, if you wanted that plan to be reviewed in the old system, the whole plan was looked at. So even the bits that you loved were at risk of being changed. With plan variations, you can now actually highlight just some parts that you would like to be varied. So that's good. So they're saying to us, these variations will help participants access new supports quickly without having to go through a full plan reassessment. So they're saying it could be possible for that one section or one thing to be varied without you having to go through a full plan reassessment. Now, you might be thinking, why is she saying plan reassessment? That's because that's another new term. So it's now no longer called a plan review. Okay, so we'll have a look at some slides in a sec about old language, new language. So the NDIA is now saying we will also start using the term plan reassessment instead of plan review to avoid confusion with an internal review of decisions. Don't worry, we'll also talk about that. So that also used to be known as something different. So there are 3 new terms on this page that we'll get to in more detail. Participants and authorised representatives will still have the right to appeal our decisions through the current internal and external review processes. But if you do want to ask for one of those internal reviews, of course, there's now a new form, and I'll also show you that. So we have plan variations, they're brand new. Plan reassessments are the new language for plan review. And also we have new language around internal review of decisions. So if you're thinking, what is she talking about? I haven't had my dinner. Don't worry, we're about to go through each one individually. So another couple of points that the agency has popped onto their website around changes is that the new Act changes recognise the importance of carers and family in the principles of the NDIS Act. That's lovely, but wouldn't it have been great if they already had done that in the old Act? But anyway, that's all right. They're also adding lived experience of disability as a consideration for membership of the NDIS board. Again, seems a bit late, but that's okay. I will not let my anger come out here. It's good that they're at least acknowledging that now. The agency is also clarifying that episodic and fluctuating impairments can be considered permanent when determining eligibility to the scheme, including for people with psychosocial disability. So there was a bit of a concern with people trying to access the scheme for the first time, where if their disability was not stable and was not presenting as having, you know, a significant impact on someone's function all of the time, there was the risk that they may not meet access to the NDIS because on some days or some weeks or some months, their function was not profoundly impacted because they had an episodic disability. Changes to the Act is now saying that they can recognise those as still being lifelong, permanent and profoundly impacting someone's function, even if it's not the same every day. They've also added some additional risk assessments in place for people who want to use plan managers. So they're trying to protect people who want to use unregistered service providers. So if you are somebody who self-manages, you might, plan managers, you might find that there are some additional questions that happen at your planning reassessments about that. Okay, so this is the thing I wanted to tell you about that came in as a change to legislation on the 8th of April, so even before the changes on July 1. And I think this is a really excellent one, and this is one that you can refer to if you need to. One of the changes to the legislation is that now you must be given reasons for and against reviewable decisions. So what that means is that, and this is going to be another topic that we do as a separate Zoom, where we talk about legislation and we talk about how funding decisions are made based on the NDIS Act. And one of the key sections around how planners at the agency make funding decisions, they must make those decisions against what are called the reasonable and necessary criteria. There are 6 criteria. This change that came in on the 8th of April is saying that if something that you have requested has not been funded, the planners now must give you reasons, clear reasons against which reasonable and necessary criteria you did not meet. So that to me is a little bit of a gift where you actually are being given a bit of a hint around this is the stuff you didn't tell us enough about so that you can then go and do that. So that's something that people used to have to battle to get clarity on, and now it's something that they must do. So something that I've learned the hard way of being in the sector for such a long time is that when we need to advocate for things in the NDIS or disability sector, that it's best if we advocate with policy, legislation, and objective information. I used to be a junior caseworker who advocated for things with emotion. Doesn't work. So if you're going to advocate for this sort of thing, do not be afraid to reference the legislation link, and do not be afraid to reference section 100 part 1 and give them this link. I don't think that I am being rude by saying that there may be some assessors who aren't clearly aware of all of these changes. So you may need to gently self-advocate with this evidence to someone who may not know as much about the changes as you hopefully will after tonight. I might actually check the chat for a sec. Oh, no, it's just my buddies. Okay, so Janet has asked around plan variations and plan reassessments. I am going to show you the differences in a sec, Janet, and then I'm going to show you the application form, and hopefully that's going to help you. So let's just hold that thought. If I don't cover it, let me know, but we're about to look at the differences. Okay, so let's go. Plan variations. First, we need to look at what these things used to be called, and you're still going to hear it. It's old language, but you know, it's NDIS. We've got people who've been around for a while. They're still going to call it the old thing. So the old language is a light touch plan review, plan extension, rollover, plan continuation. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of rollover, new plan, similar supports, or new plan minor changes. That is old language, even though new plan, similar supports, and new plan minor changes only came in within the last 12 months. That's already old language, okay? So plan variation now means that the topics on the right. So in some situations, plans can be varied without a full reassessment, okay? A participant can request a variation at any time using the change of details or situation form. I'm going to show you that form in a sec. So if someone does request a plan variation using that form, the NDIA will respond to that request within 21 days. And their response is either going to be, yep, we will agree to vary the plan, or we've decided to not vary the plan, or we need more time. So again, it all depends on the evidence. We all know that we need to provide amazing evidence to try and get things through the NDIS, and that's what we'll cover in one of our future webinars around the legislation and using that to have really good evidence. So where a plan is varied, the participant will receive a copy of the varied plan within 7 days. Where a plan reaches its end date, now known as reassessment date, before a reassessment is completed, the plan will be varied to extend by 12 months. So again, it used to be plan start date, plan end date. It's now plan start date, plan reassessment date, just to keep us on our toes. Okay, so when a plan variation's brought in, when are they used? So if there's an error that needs to be fixed, if someone wants to request a variation to how they're managing their funding, so agency plan or self-managed, if there needs to be an addition of a piece of assistive technology or funding around home modifications, to make a change to an existing stated support. So for those of you who aren't aware, the word stated on a plan means that there's no flexibility, and it means that the funding must be used as written. So for example, some people will have a budget for improved daily living, for therapies, and it may have a $10,000 budget, and it may say that you can use this funding to flexibly meet your therapy needs around, you know, building your capacity and meeting your goals. That's quite flexible. You can choose how to use that with different therapies that meet your goals and meet the funding criteria. If, however, the $10,000 budget has $3,000 that say stated occupational therapy functional assessment, it means that you must use that $3,000 for an occupational therapy functional assessment, and the remaining $7,000 is flexible. So you've got to look out for that word stated. Another thing that is coming that I haven't seen yet, but I think some people have seen in their plans, is that the agency may now make it stated what provider a person might have to use. And so again, they've made it something that's not flexible. And so again, that is something that you can request to be varied in an application for a plan variation if you would like that to be varied. The way a funding is stated, or the way that they may have stated that you must use the funding with a particular service provider. Another thing that can be varied is if there's a crisis or an emergency where funding needs to be added. This is new. So this is actually something on the new form where you can actually tick that this is, you know, an urgent crisis where a plan needs to be varied because of something that's a crisis or an emergency now. And so there was never really a form that could be made as clear as this new one now. If a minor variation is required to increase the funding of supports in the plan. So again, that could be something that needs to be changed or increased for just one part of the plan, where you don't actually want the whole plan to be looked at. So that's plan variations. Let me go to the chat. I bet C will be used a lot, says Andrew. Which one was C? Notification that the NDIS needs more time. Okay, yeah. You've been around the block, hey, yeah. So Diane is saying, how much evidence do they require if you want to vary your plan? Let's have a look at the form in a second, Diane, because hopefully what I'm hoping is that it makes it really clear to you about when to do that and at what point. So hold that thought, because the new form is longer, it's got new words, it's very wordy, but I also think it helps to step people through what to do and how. So plan reassessment. This is another new term, and it used to be known as a full plan review, scheduled plan review, unscheduled plan review, and also it used to be known as the change of circumstances or S48 review relating to section 48 of the NDIS. So remembering that in the olden days, such as i.e. last year, everybody, before participant check-ins came in as an option, everybody had to have a scheduled plan review before their plan came to its end. Since participant check-ins have come in, people are now being given the option to just have a plan varied and not have to go through a full plan reassessment. So plan reassessments are not something that everyone now has to have at their plan end date or reassessment date. You may still want one and need a full plan reassessment, but it's not like the olden days where every single person had their full plan reassessed, all evidence every single time their plan came to an end. Those days are over. Okay, so a participant can ask for a reassessment at any time using the same form I'm about to show you, the change of details or situation form. The NDIA will respond within 21 days, either resulting in a new plan, a variation to the current plan, or the decision to, sorry, not reassess the plan. So the NDIA may choose to do a reassessment at the end of a plan to build a new plan or vary the existing plan. Why do they have to use such tricky language? So when you're thinking of plan reassessment, just think that's what it used to be when it was called a full plan review or a scheduled plan review. So when you're having a full plan reassessment, that's what you're used to when you have to collect all of the evidence and quotes, all of those things that you're used to doing. That's what needs to be done if you're having a full plan reassessment, okay? So let me check the chat. Janet, with plan variations, how confident can a participant be that only the requested category will be looked at rather than the whole plan being reassessed? Hard to know, Janet, because this is brand new, and I've not actually heard of anyone who has gone through a plan variation yet. This is so brand new. But let's go back to the variation slide. And yeah, so I guess they're saying that if you request a plan variation, they'll either vary it, not vary it, or ask for more time. Look, I can't actually answer because I haven't experienced doing it with anyone yet because it's so new. I'm sure that we're going to start hearing more stories about this, and hopefully we can learn from more case studies. I guess tonight we just wanted to alert you of the new language, but unfortunately because it's so new, we don't have case studies for you yet, but of course when we do, we'll share them. Let's then have a look at the other change. So before we go into this slide, I might actually show you this one. So when you have your plan, you receive it, it has a start date. We know that you have the right to look at the plan and to look at the funding, and you have 3 months to apply to the NDIS to basically say, what is this? I don't agree with the funding in this plan. I would like you to internally review your decision about how you came upon this plan. So if you have a plan, you look at it and it's almost like you're thinking, how did they come up with this? Did they not even read my evidence? The plan has made a mistake. What's going on here? You have that 3 months to request an internal review of that funding decision, that planning decision. If you do that, we know that the person who reviews your plan internally will be different to the person who made the decision that you're requesting to be reviewed. They're very strict on that 3-month time period. And of course, if you do request an internal review of the decision, there's a new form for that, and you need to have amazing evidence for that. If it comes back that the agency says, sorry, we stand by our original decision, and you still want to pursue, no, there's something wrong with this, I'd still like it to be reviewed, the option then is that you have to go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal for an external review, and you have 28 days to make that application from the date of the outcome of the internal review. So that is not fun. We don't want to go to the AAT. That's when it becomes you as the applicant versus the agency as the respondent. It becomes a very big deal where it really is you up against the lawyers paid for by the NDIA. So of course you have that right, and I've supported a few people through that in the last 12 months. But ideally, we want to avoid having to do that by having amazing, wonderful evidence in the first place when you're having your plan reassessed. So just wanting to go back to then this language around that internal review, when you do want to request an internal review of your plan and an internal review of the decision of the agency, that used to be called an S100. Or Section 100. It also used to be called a review of a reviewable decision or a ROD. That's old language. It's now called internal review of decision. So participants can ask for a review of NDIA decisions using the request for a review of a decision form within 3 months of the decision, like we just had a look at in that flowchart. If a participant is not happy with the outcome of this review, they can also then go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal to review that decision externally. So just like we had a look at that flowchart, so you've already always had the option or the right to request an internal review of a decision. It's just that it's now called something else. It's no longer called S100. It's no longer called review of reviewable decision. Before we look at the forms, we have chat action. So Beth, the new forms are already available and I'm about to show them to you, and you're going to get them as attachments when you get the slides. Louise just went through a change of circumstances review in July. It was handled poorly. Oh dear, I'm sorry, Louise. Andrew's asking, how often are internal reviews typically successful in your experience, Lisa? I keep hearing that it's getting harder and that people are finding that it's, even if they feel like they're providing really amazing evidence, they're still feeling like they're not being heard. So I'm actually talking to some colleagues who are wondering if we can be a bit cheeky, right? Where, okay, so look, this hasn't been tested, all right? But this is one theory of a colleague who's a very good game player, that if somebody has an NDIS plan and it's pretty good, it's all right, it's sort of almost okay, and then you have contact by the agency where you are given the option to have a participant check-in, where you're given the option to have a new plan for a default period of 2 years that's the same as your current plan. So that would be a plan variation, the only variation being your end date moves by 2 years. So you basically say, yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to get the new plan that's for 2 years, and then I'm going to just request a plan variation for the bit I don't like. So that's what's being thrown around as maybe a clever way of playing the system. Haven't seen it tested, don't know if it works, don't take my word for it, but people are just starting to wonder, do we have a bit more power now because there's now plan variations where we can actually request just portions of the plan to be looked at and varied rather than risking the whole thing. So something to think about. Louise said we were ready to go to the AAT when NDIS changes a decision at the last minute. We also had assistance from Minister Bill Shorten's office. I recommend contacting Bill Shorten's office in this situation. Yeah, Louise, the people I've worked with who've gone to AAT, it is significantly, profoundly challenging and intense and very involved. And I take my hat off to all of them because they have self-represented up against, you know, very hotshot lawyers that the agency pays for. So yeah, it's not something you want to be gunning for. Are the decisions of the internal reviews usually reasonable in your experience? So Andrew, I would be basing that on going back to the legislation. And I'm quite obsessed with the legislation and the 6 criteria. I reckon you and me have spoken about the criteria, Andrew, have we? Section 34? Yeah, so at least we know now that when results come back from internal review requests, we know now that because of the new legislation and the changes on the 8th of April, we now know that they must provide their reasonings for their decisions against reasonable and necessary criteria. So you'll be able to see if they're reasonable and how they've made those decisions. So I don't risk anything. If I'm going to go for an internal review with someone, I make sure that every piece of evidence is obsessively linked to the legislation to not leave anything up to chance. So if some of you are wondering what she's talking about, we are doing a separate Zoom on how we can understand the legislation to make our evidence as hopefully as effective as possible to justify funded supports. Louise is saying we had excellent evidence and documents from allied health, psychology, OT, medical specialists, and still we had a ridiculous amount of refusal and rejection of this evidence from the NDIS. So it's hard to know how to comment on that, Louise, because it really depends on whether those people who wrote the reports could speak NDIS and could reference the legislation to the letter. So I'm you know, not commenting on the reports you're mentioning, but just from personal experience, I have seen many supporting letters and reports that are beautiful. They're 12 pages long, they're graphically designed, they're very shiny, and sometimes they actually don't reference any part of the NDIS legislation. So that's what we'll be talking about in one of our future sessions. Yeah, Diane has worked with at a plan reassessment where it was obvious that no one had read the reports. I'm just having a look. So they were all very detailed and addressed all the criteria. Yeah, okay. So that's where you could actually, you know, uphold your right to make a complaint if you think that they've not actually looked at your evidence, Diane. Otherwise, you could request an internal review of the decision, referencing what was requested, what was recommended, and then linking it to all the evidence that you've already provided. And you could actually highlight that you're not sure that the evidence was considered. Wow, Meg saying that working with the AAT was more reasonable than dealing with the agency. Yep. Very interesting point. Yeah. Okay, so I'm actually going to now show you guys the forms. So before that, just wanting to let you know as well that when you get the links and the slides, you'll also be sent as an attachment this booklet that was produced by the Summer Foundation earlier this year that also gives their version of the legislation changes written to the audience of NDIS participants. So when you get the slides, the link is there, but hopefully you'll also get it as an attachment. So now I'm going to try and be clever, and I'm going to try and share my screen to the forms. So let me just get them ready and do a live share. So I'm going to first share to the new change of details or change of situation form. So people may have known this in its previous life as the change of circumstances or S48, section 48. So this is the new form, and this is the one that's come out since July 1 that's using the new language. So they're telling us you can use this form to let us know if your details have changed, you want to change something in your current plan, your situation has changed and your plan no longer meets your disability support needs, so you want a new plan. They actually help by trying to do a really quick summary of what's a variation and what's a reassessment. So when you ask us to change your plan, we call this a participant requested plan change. Depending on what's changed for you, we may be able to work with you to change your current plan. We call this a plan variation. So the plan variation is when a change is being made to your current plan. If you're batting for a new plan, that's when you're having a plan reassessment. Okay, so that's probably the best way to look at it. We generally won't change your plan if you want more funding because you've used all of the funding in the plan. So they're basically saying you do need support to understand how to budget out your funding in the plan period that you have, because you can't say to us, please vary my plan because I've run out of funding because I didn't budget. So they're saying that there very clearly. If there are significant changes to your situation, we might need to do a full plan reassessment and create a new plan. So I'm working with someone at the moment in a similar situation to this, where the person has a 2-year plan, which started when they were 16. They're now in year 12 and they're 18. And they're saying, my goals from 2 years ago make no sense. It says nothing about work. All I want to do now is plan my work after school. The goals in my current plan and the funding in my plan have nothing to do with work. It's no longer appropriate for me. I need it to be reassessed. So the other thing that they're doing now, which I think is positive, the agency is informing you about the fact that they have operational guidelines for all different parts of the NDIS and all of the different funding buckets and different support categories. So they have a separate website for that now. That's been around for some time, but it's where all of the operational guidelines live. And there are operational guidelines that relate to changing your plan. So variations, reassessments. So it might feel a bit overwhelming knowing all of this, but also in the NDIS, knowledge is power. So it can be really helpful to know, because I've often felt in the past that operational guidelines have existed the whole time, but the agency has done a bad job of informing you all about it. So, of course, you know, the people who can fill in this form needs to be the applicant themselves, the participant, or their authorized representative. So that is often referring to someone who's a plan nominee. So let's have a look. They're letting us know how you can return the form, and they're letting us know the different sections. So part A is about the person. It's about the NDIS participant that this relates to. Then they're saying if you're someone who's completing the form on behalf of the participant, they want your details here. Oh, we have someone off mute. I'm just going to find who you are. Hang on a minute. Can't find you. I think you've gone back on. Good job. Okay, so then they're asking, so what has changed? This is the change in situation, change in details form. They're saying to us, what's the change? Is it just that the contact details have changed? Cool, you can use the form for that. Has your plan got an error? We've definitely seen that. By the way, you can tick more than one. I would like the reassessment date of my plan changed. Remember, that's the new language for, I'd like the end date of my plan changed. I would like to change how the funding is managed in my plan, or my situation has changed. Remember that the way you manage your funding has a big impact in your flexibility on how you can use your funding, whether you want to use registered or non-registered service providers. That's a conversation for another evening, but the way that you choose to manage your funding can be significant in the way that you can use your funding. So that's why they've given that option now about changing your funds management. So section here around change the details, section here around my plan has an error. This is very new. So if you're saying you would like the reassessment date of your plan changed, they're now saying, so what? Extend it or shorten it? So you're then going to have to explain why. So you might actually say you want it extended, because you may say, this current plan is meeting my needs, my goals are stable, my support needs are stable. I'd like my current plan to be extended. So they'll then, index the funding so that you don't have to have a variation. You don't have to have a reassessment. You're basically saying, just extend the one I've got because it's working. So that's a new option as well. This is a section where you can highlight if you would like to change how your funds are managed, and whether you want it to be for just a specific part of the plan or the whole thing. Again, that's new. That was not in the change of circumstances form. And this here is where you're highlighting my situation has changed. So this is where they're giving you the option to say, I've had small changes, I've had large changes, or I need more or different supports urgently. So again, the option to highlight urgency was never on any of the other forms. When they're saying, what type of plan change are you requesting? They're saying plan variation. So I'd like my current plan varied. Plan reassessment, I need a whole new plan, or I'm not sure. And you can tick that one and they'll contact you to discuss it. So that is all very new, and it's all since the new legislation. So then they're giving you more details here around, so what has changed with your situation? What does it mean? What does that change mean to your funded supports? What supports are you asking to be included? And is there any additional information? So this is where mostly this form, I see it as a bit of a full stop. All of the effort is done before you get to this form. So you want to have all of the evidence of the change in your situation and the change in your support needs all done, all gathered, so that by the time you get to filling this form in, you're doing a very quick summary and actually then saying, please refer to attached report A, or please refer to attached functional capacity assessment, or please refer to attached physiotherapy report. So most of the evidence for the changes will be in the attached reports that you'll have to gather to highlight the evidence that there's been changes. And there you have it. Then we're signing it off and then we're sending it in. So as you can see, it's very different. It includes all of the new language, and it's trying to help you out a bit by, asking you if it's a variation, so a change to your current plan, or a reassessment, a whole new plan is needed. And then sort of helping you out by letting you know the kind of evidence that you might need. So having a look at the chat. My son used to work at an ADE. Yeah. Okay. So Helen is right. Helen is referring to what I call NDIS language. So I absolutely agree, Helen. The NDIS has its own language. Mostly the language that we need to use is related back to the legislation. So the section of the NDIS Act, which is related to funding decisions. But also the big thing about NDIS language is that any reports or requests or recommendations for funding need to relate back to functional impact and the impact of the disability on someone's functional capacity. We don't want to talk about diagnosis. We don't want to talk about health. We need to talk about the impact of the disability on someone's functional capacity. And so that's definitely the way that reports need to be using NDIS speak. Yep, having a look. So Maria, I totally understand what you're saying, that it is very difficult to stay up to date with the changes. It makes it really difficult to understand your rights and how to navigate. So hopefully these sorts of sessions will help, and then they're going to be followed up by sending you the slides and the forms and the links to the legislation changes. And I guess, the other thing you could do is reach out and contact Fighting Chance to see if we can give you any other support. But I agree with you. There are so many changes that make people feel disempowered. One of my biggest frustrations is that many of these changes are not clearly communicated to you guys by the agency. They should be, and they're not. But I guess one thing that you could do as one option is to make sure you're on the NDIS newsletter. The other thing that I would say, I have a conflict of interest. I work somewhere else as well. I work at Disability Services Consulting, where we have a free newsletter as well that comes out multiple times each week. So any changes are always commented on and written about. So I think that a sense of disempowerment comes when you're not aware of the changes that impact you and your children. Janet is saying, any experience with success or failure in extending the end date and having the same level of funding supports continue? I think it's probably too early to tell, Janet, but officially, if someone is contacted by the agency for a participant check-in and you're given the option to vary your current plan to extend it for a default health plan period of 2 years. And you're saying that my current plan meets my needs and my current goals are stable. Officially, the word is that it should be the same plan extended for 2 years and varied. Just at the end date is varied. So the reassessment date is varied. So the theory is that the same level of funding should happen, but we don't have enough on the ground examples. But in theory, it should be that. I'm now just going to show you, I have to pull up the other form. So just give me a sec there while I find it. Okay, just pulling it up now. Okay, testing my IT skills. So this is a new form for requesting an internal review of a decision. So remembering this used to be called Section 100 or S100 or the review of a reviewable decision. It's now the request for a review of a decision. And again, they're linking you to the operational guidelines that's relevant. This is the form that you use if you have a plan, you've just received your plan and you're saying, no, we actually really don't agree with the decision that the agency has made in forming this plan for me or my child. I would like it to be internally reviewed. And you have 3 months to do that, to submit this application for the request of the internal review. And that gives you the time to hopefully get the additional evidence that you might need. So again, it's going through contact details, it's going through the details of the person or you if you're submitting it on behalf of the person. And then they're asking you about what would you like reviewed internally. So they're asking first, what was the date of the decision that you want reviewed? Because they're making sure, are you getting this into us within 3 months of our decision? Mostly it's around making sure that it's 3 months since the plan start date. They're very strict on that. And then they're saying, so what decision were you expecting? They're saying, well, what did you want the plan to be? Why do you think we should make a different decision? Again, don't use emotion here. Don't be subjective. Be really clear on the evidence base and being really objective and linking it to evidence that you'll be attaching to this form. Is there any information you have given us that you'd like us to reconsider? So this goes back to one of the comments in the chat earlier where someone said it's like they didn't even read anything we provided them. So that's where here you could say, yes, these reports reference the dates, list them, were already provided, and we don't think that they were considered in the decision by the agency when forming this plan. They're also saying then, is there any new evidence that you'd like us to consider? So you also have that right. And again, it's the end of the form. So like I said, filling these forms in are like the very end. It's like the full stop of the process. It's what you do leading up to doing these forms. It's collecting the evidence. It's referencing the evidence you already have and really just using this form to bring it all together and summarize. Having a look. Beth, has anyone else had a problem with participants being contacted for check-ins or variations, and because they don't understand all the terminology, they agree to something that doesn't work for them? Yep, absolutely, Beth. I've heard of it happen. So that was the topic of last month's Zoom meeting, where we said that if you're working with a participant who does have specific communication support needs, such as that they need to be on the phone with a support person or a support coordinator, to contact the agency now and say that you need that to be flagged in the person's NDIS file. And the person also has the right to say, no, thank you, I don't want to talk about this now. And you can then go back and reschedule the check-in. Janet's asking, what is a check-in? So Janet, we spent an hour on that last month, so it's going to be hard for me to do that very quickly. But it's basically where the agency initiates contact with the participant or their nominee, and they have a really quick conversation where they're saying, how's it going? I'm just checking on your goals, checking on your support needs, checking on your plan. And based on a very short phone call, it's determined that the person will either have their current plan varied to be extended to be the same for 2 more years. That's the default plan period, or actually that it becomes obvious that they need a full plan reassessment. So the check-in is when the agency is initiating contact and when you're submitting the forms that I've just shown you, it's when you are initiating contact and you're saying, agency, I'd like my plan to be varied or reassessed. When the check-in happens, it's the agency initiating communication and initiating contact with you. So yeah, confusing. Now I'm just going to try and find the legislation changes for us. Just give me a second. I have too many tabs open on my computer, as always. And just to show you here, so this is the link that you will be seeing from the slides, but this is just to show you what it looks like. Hopefully you can't see too much about my internet shopping on those tabs up there. And this is what we will be linking to you for the legislation changes. So this is some of what you can see here has been copied onto the slides around the media release about the changes, but this link gives a lot more information. It gives a lot more information about the amendments to the Act that came into effect on the 1st of July. You know, much more detail around things like the NDIS acknowledging diversity in bodies, genders, relationships, so the language being more inclusive around those things. Also, that the NDIS is wanting to invest more in mainstream services and building their capacity to be part of someone's support network. Again, like we already looked at, the Act is now trying to acknowledge that some disabilities are episodic or have fluctuating natures and they don't have a stability like some other disabilities. So they're trying to be more inclusive at the access or application stage. So there's a whole bunch there for you to roll through. They've also then got a frequently asked questions section and linking it to the operational guidelines, which is the way that the NDIS explains the legislation and explains how it looks on the ground, how the legislation is operationalized, really. Where it says who was consulted on these changes to the operational guidelines, they said, we tested our updated guidelines with members of our Independent Advisory Council. So just in case you're wondering who is this Independent Advisory Council, it's the IAC. And the IAC is a panel of people with lived experience of disability, either being an NDIS participant themselves or an informal support or a family member. And they are the highest voice that the board of the NDIS listens to. I know 2 people on the IAC and they have a really important role. So they were involved in these changes. So yeah, they go through, so what are some changes specifically for psychosocial disability because of the changes to the legislation? What are the changes around plan management, plan reviews, which are now plan reassessments? So it goes through a whole bunch of info for you there. So they've actually said, when would the NDIA do a variation rather than a reassessment? So that was one of the questions asked earlier. So that's there for you. So yeah, that's another place you can go for some more information. I have got to the end of the slide, so now you have a chance to see if you can test me and ask any questions. And if you do, you can come off mute if you like, and we can have a chat between now and 8 o'clock. Who's feeling brave? By the way, I never pretend, so if I don't know the answer, I won't pretend I do. We'll find it out and get it to you. You don't have to have a question. You can go off and watch ABC News again if you like. But I'm here to try if you like. Just in case some of you have not seen in the chat as well, Susanna, who works with myself and Alessandra at Fighting Chance, has put the link into a section of the Fighting Chance website that's trying to build educational resources around what's going on with the NDIS, including recordings of these sessions and resources that come out of them. So I will just sip my water to see if anyone wants to chat. Might get an early mark. Okay, yes, so Susanna is saying, does anyone have any ideas for future webinars, any burning questions you want to have? We now have 2 questions that relate to the legislation. So Andrew's judging my tabs. I judge myself enough, Andrew, about my tabs. I don't need you. I am very self-judgy about the number of my tabs. I even have my daughter trying to teach me how to group them, and it hasn't worked. So I feel like if there's no other questions, I will spend the next 7 minutes. Any specials on Amazon? No, it was something for my tax, Andrew. You did see the Amazon tab. How embarrassing. Okay, so I might actually, a few people are asking around how to write fancy reports. So we're going to do a separate Zoom on this, but since we have 7 minutes left, I'm going to take 7 minutes to show you the legislation section that myself and Andrew were bantering on about 40 minutes ago. So let's do it. Okay, my most tabbed tab. Andrew, if you're taking tabs on my tabs, this is my most tabbed tab, all right? So how to explain? So the NDIS is based on federal legislation, the NDIS Act of 2013, okay? So there are many, many sections. Maybe someone on here is a lawyer. I'm going to sound like a silly person because I'm not a lawyer, but there are different sections in Acts of Parliament. Section 34 is the one that you all need to be in love with, fall in love with, become intimately related to, because Section 34 is reasonable and necessary supports. There are 6 criteria that NDIA planners must make their decisions on when they are determining what funding ends up in a plan. So when a planner is looking at your reports and your therapy reports and your quotes and your supporting letters that you take to a plan reassessment, they are checking if all 6 of these criteria have been addressed and justified. Something will only be funded if all 6 of these criteria are addressed and justified in your evidence. So this is the fastest Section 34 I'm ever going to do, but let's go for it. Okay, now I'm going to try and be fancy and make this bigger. Did that work? No, that made it worse. There we go. Let's do that. No, that's worse. Okay, Section 34. So let's take it one at a time. The first one is the support that you're requesting or that's being recommended must assist the person to pursue the goals. Basically, it's saying the NDIS funded supports must assist the person to pursue their NDIS disability-related goals that are on their plan, which is why it's so important that every time you go for a plan reassessment, you really take time and care in how you write your goal statements, okay? Next, the support will assist the participant to undertake activities so as to facilitate the participant's social and economic participation. Now, you might look at that and go, not everyone wants to work as a goal. So economic participation doesn't mean that everyone has to have a goal to work in open paid employment. It could be that they want to work towards volunteering or studying or something related to participating in the economy. But this one really needs NDIS language translation. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a physio who had written a physio report for someone's plan reassessment, and they were writing it as a physio as if they were writing it to other physios. And I said, no, you're writing it to an NDIA planner. They're not a physio. You need to speak NDIS to them, because they had done the physio report that had things like the person's physio assessment results, or the person's 6-minute walk test, or the person's timed up and go, report. And I said to them, that doesn't mean anything to the decision makers at the agency. That only means something if you're a physio, and I'm an ex-physio, right? So I had to say to them, what does that result mean? And they said, well, that result means that Lisa has an increased falls risk. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Well, that's why I've recommended this frequency of physio. Okay, why? Well, because they want to work on their safety in mobilizing outside. Why? Because they want to be independent in accessing the community. Great, now we've got it. Now we're talking about social and economic participation. So the therapists often need help to get from their language to translating it to NDIS language, okay? The next point is the support must represent value for money, in that the costs of the support are reasonable relative to both the benefits achieved and the cost of alternative support. This is related to the fact that the NDIS is an insurance scheme. So we need to show, hey, if you do this now, if you invest in me now in this way, You're actually building my capacity, so I might need less funded supports in the future. Another way to show value for money is what a very good friend of mine did as a participant, that he requires transfer support into bed every night. He's a wheelchair user who requires a hoist transfer. So when he was transferred into bed at night, if the support worker set him up with the TV on and the support worker left the TV remote out of his reach, he couldn't turn the TV off to go to sleep. So he would have to call a one-on-one support worker at evening rates just to come over to turn off the TV. What a waste of funding, right? So he was able to advocate instead, obviously with a whole bunch of OT reports, that if there was an upfront investment in assistive technology for him to have independence in using lighting and electronics within his home, all through an app in his phone, he can just independently now turn off the lights, turn off the TV, close his doors independently. So that upfront cost was an investment, and it was value for money because the alternative was calling back support workers every time this sort of thing happened. So that's another example of value for money. Next one is the support will be or is likely to be effective and beneficial for the participant. So it needs to work, and you need to have regard to current good practice. They're basically saying, make sure you don't make stuff up. You need to give us an evidence base that what you're recommending is actually evidence-based practice. So I now, when I work with therapists, when I see what they're recommending, you know, the frequency of their therapy, that sort of thing, I'll say to them, is there a research paper? Is there a journal article? Is there something that actually is backing up what you're saying as evidence-based? I'm now getting most therapists saying yes, and they're now including links to journal articles and research articles in their supporting letters so that they can actually really prove that what they're recommending is evidence-based practice. So they shouldn't whinge if you're asking them for that, because it's also in their best interest, right? Because if the person gets the funding that they're recommending, they're going to then continue to be funded to provide supports too. I've had no one get cranky about me asking them to do that. I'm getting really great responses from therapists providing that. The next one is saying that the funding or provision of the support takes into account what is reasonable to expect of families, carers, informal networks, and the community to provide. This is basically saying the NDIS will only fund it if it's not the responsibility of someone else, such as you guys. So this is where you have the right to write a carer impact statement, which clearly states what is and is not reasonable to expect of you. So if the person that you're supporting requires a support and you state that it is not reasonable to expect it of you, that can build an argument for the NDIS to fund it. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that, and they might throw arguments at you around what's parental responsibility, what's not. This is why we need a whole different hour on this topic, but this is why you have the right to state what is not reasonable to expect of you. Again, this one will be part of the next one of the future conversations because it requires a lot more deep dive. But the last criteria is basically saying the NDIS will only fund it if it's the NDIS's responsibility to fund it. So this is where we are comparing NDIS responsibility to other mainstream government buckets of money, such as the mental health system, the health system, the education system, those sorts of things. So there is a way we can tackle this in a different Zoom. I want to show you how you can actually look at this further. So those 6 criteria are the reasonable and necessary criteria, and all 6 of those must be met before a planner will fund something. So then what that means is that all of the evidence that you're collecting for plan reassessments need to address all 6 of these criteria. So that might sound very geeky, but it's the way it has to be, especially when people are finding that funding decisions are getting more and more tricky and evidence needs to be even better and better. So now it's 8:02 and now we're late, see? So I'm sorry if